Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of On the Blood Trail. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're out in the woods. We're actually in bear camp. Still a little bit early. Can't see any snow behind us, but there's snow behind you. Just doing a little bit of bear hunting. We got my brother Ryan.
How's it going, everyone?
I've told a couple stories that involved Ryan being with me and being pretty frustrated with me. So now you can put the face to the name. And we got a good friend of ours, Spencer Minchau.
Well,
And Spencer's been hunting with us. I think Ryan actually got Spencer into hunting for the most part. So we definitely had some memories made. Today we're going to do a little bit of talking about bear hunting and some other stuff surrounding bear hunting. And I'm actually going to start off a little bit so you guys get a bit of a background. Ryan, why don't you tell us about the first bear you killed and how that all went down?
uh, first bear I killed, I believe should have been about 12 years old. This bear maybe 12, and we're hunting kind of up in the backcountry. It was probably third week of May, and it was a multi-generational hunt we were doing. It was with my grandpa, my dad, and then Tyler and me, and we kind of gotten up this little lease road. We come over this up this road, a bit of a hill that kind of crested down into a valley, and on that hill it was a four-way stop. And at that four-way stop, you just kind of crest the hill and you could see a bear coming up the road. And so we kind of scrambled out of the truck, get the gun, load it up. I was pretty young, right? So my dad's really coaching me into it. 12 years old, right? And got in position on the road, just on the other side of the four-way stop, just kind of waiting for that bear to come up. And that bear came up the road. It was about 500 yards when we first seen it. And it came through about 50, and made a good shot on it. Shot it front on, kind of hit it just a bit to this side, dropped it in its tracks with a 30-06. And I mean, there was video footage at the time of that bear hunt, and I got a little bit more rowdy after I shot that bear than I should have. But it just kind of goes to show how exciting a bear hunt really can be.
So, Ryan, earlier in that day, you had the chance to have your first bear be a pretty nice colored bear. You couldn't close the deal, and it was something I talked about in my last podcast with Buck Fever. Why don't you tell us about that a little?
Yeah, we had gone down into this cup block, and when we had turned around, all of a sudden, I mean, it couldn't have been 30, 40 seconds since we had gone down there and turned around, and there was a bear, nice colored bear, nice brown bear, feeding up on the hill 300 yards away. And so we put a nice stalk on it. And at the time, I mean, I had shot, I believe it was two whitetail bucks and a cougar. So I was fairly fresh into, harvesting animals. I made one long distance shot. I had made a shot at 348 yards on a whitetail. But you always kind of second guess and doubt yourself, when you're young. I mean, there's a lot that can go wrong. So when I lined up on this bear, we just had a bipod that you would screw and attach to your gun where your sling would go. And I got lined up on it, and I couldn't find a way to get steady on the bear, and I knew how disappointed everybody in the crew would be if I wasn't able to get steady on this nice brown bear. And if I wounded it, no one wants to chase a wounded animal in the bush. No one wants to wound an animal, most of all. And I just wasn't comfortable with it, so I gave my dad the chance to take it, and he took the bear, and he made a great shot on it. We found it within 50 yards. Could I have made the shot? I mean, the potential is there, but the potential is also there because I was so rattled and fighting buck fever and also pure pressure that you don't want to screw up when you're a young guy, so it can be a little difficult.
Yeah, that's a really good decision because I know, even speaking from experience, I'm sure all of us have had a situation where we've had an animal in front of us and we rushed the opportunity because we weren't ready, and maybe it didn't end out the way that we wanted it to. But that was a good decision, and we did end up getting a nice bear because another guy had a tag. That was Dad,
Yeah.
and beautiful bear. But Spencer, how about you? First time you went bear hunting? How about your first kill story?
My first bear trip was about 40 kilometers from this location here. I was out hunting with Ryan and his dad. I think Tyler must have been working
Yeah, I wasn't
because
there
he
for that
didn't
one.
make it on that trip. We had found a hidden lease. We were driving around, found a hidden lease, nice and close to town. The spot's not the same as it used to be, but it used to be about 4 kilometers from town. You could walk into this lease, and you couldn't see it from the road. So there's about a 50 or 100 foot wide cut line that we'd walk down, and found the lease. It had about, what was it, 200 yards by 200 yards.
Yeah, it was nice square.
Yeah, nice square lease. It was south facing, so the grass would grow there early. And we'd stalked in there a couple times, seen a few smaller bears. One time we went in there, there was a bigger bear. and I got laid up on a log nicely. First time ever shooting Ryan's gun. I don't. I know I missed. It wasn't the gun. We shot it after the gun was bang on. I think I might add a little bit of buck fever, or just it's a little heavier trigger than I'm used to. And like going through it, it's like okay, the bear turned, looked like it got hit. Couldn't find blood. It ran off like it wasn't hit. Checked the trail, checked for hours there, found all kinds of bear sign, no blood, like no sign of a struggle or wounded animal. And I think we played it back thinking about it, and we think I shot just under the bear, and I must have pulled right off of it by squeezing the trigger. Then the following season, I ended up getting my first bear. We were hunting by a gas plant, fairly new area to us at least, I believe at the time. We're a little more familiar with it now. That one, we went down a road that we didn't first notice. We blew by it multiple times.
All night long we were driving by that road.
Yeah.
No idea it was even there.
Didn't find any bears, and then first bear we seen, it was in a lease right beside a huge cut line, so we were able to drive about a quarter mile past the bear, get out of the truck, stalk, made a nice broadside shot 100 yards.
Yeah.
Bear charged at us for about 20 yards, and then that gave me time to reload the gun. Of course, then you're all excited, aim right at the center of the bear, but this thing's coming full speed, shot right over it. Because I didn't think at the time, like, oh, this is a moving target here.
Yeah.
But the bear only ran for about 20 yards. I don't know if the gunshot turned it or what did, but it just kind of did a circle and went right back to where I shot it and piled up.
It was a nice bear too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I know I've already told my story about my first bear, and it was actually my first animal. And something that all three of our first bears have in common is that it was all spot and stalk. And we usually have a couple of different methods of doing it. For the most part, we have an area that we like to get into the middle towards the end of May. That's when all the grass is green enough that you get in there. The bears are comfortable. They're feeding all over the place. They usually give you a little bit more tolerance for trying to sneak up on them, or they're just not paying attention really. They're more in the mindset of getting that food and getting all prepared for next hibernation, I guess. And so this time around, because today's the 1st of May that we're recording this, there's still snow on the ground. It's pretty early. It's been not the latest of springs, but I'd say we're a couple weeks behind.
Totally.
Yeah, and so instead of going to our typical spot, we're actually hunting hotlines. And for those of you that don't understand what the hotlines are, it's where they got a pipeline running through the ground. It's usually pretty cleared. The hot stuff that's running through these pipelines, it just causes the grass to grow faster because it's getting more heat, and the rest of the ground is all frozen and still waiting for the sun to do all the thawing. And so that's what we do when we're hunting the hotlines, and it proves to be pretty good. But in the last couple of days, we've had lots of hotlines to look at and not a whole lot of bears to look at. So
Yeah, it's been tough. You come up with high hopes. It's the first time,
Yeah.
getting out in the season. Everyone's all excited. They want to pile in the truck, get out the bear camp, and run around in the bush. See all these bears. But unfortunately, sometimes it can be just a little bit too early. Maybe the bears just aren't, acclimatized to getting out of the den. A few things can go wrong. Yesterday we had bad weather. Nothing is worse for bear hunting than rain and wind. Bears hate rain. They hate wind. They can't see, smell, and they just hate being wet. So they just don't want to come out. And really quite evident in our hunt yesterday. I think we probably pounded for 4 hours. We were out there.
yep.
Not a single bear. I mean, we seen some fresh poop. They're there. Just got to be there at the right time, and that's for the most part what hunting hotlines is. It's very similar to hunting a bait in the sense that you're hunting a specific food source because it can only grow in a certain area. But these hotlines can stretch for miles, kilometers, miles at a time. And with all the hills and whoops and valleys that are on these lines and this different kind of terrain with the river valleys and the creek systems that are going through this area, it can make it extremely difficult to locate exactly where that bear has been feeding. And if you get lucky enough that you just pop over the right hill when you go for a walk, or you see it from the road, maybe you're quadding. I mean, there's so many different scenarios where you can spot these bears. And then the next challenge would be stalking them. And in this general area on the hotlines, we find that we run a pretty good high success of getting a good shooting opportunity, depending on the scenario that we're in, with wind direction. But for the most part, it's usually over 50% of the time that once you put a stock, you can get a shot within about 200 yards.
Yeah, and we're doing a lot of truck hunting, or road hunting, however you want to say it. Reason for that is you got to cover a lot of ground. These bears are just waking up. You're not entirely sure where they're feeding, where they're kind of hanging out in their more comfortable zone. Because a lot of times these bears wake up from their den and they take off for a big long stroll because they're not happy with just walking outside their front door and deciding that that's going to be dinner. So we got to cover a lot of ground. The other part of it too is like as it gets later in the year, it gets green in the bush, and you just it's so much more difficult to find the bears because they're not forced to come out into the opening to do all their feeding, and they spend most of the time in the trees, and you can't exactly walk around in a lot of this bush. It's pretty tight in there. Lots of dead stuff, lots of burnt stuff in certain areas. But so we do a lot of the truck hunting. And another thing I figured I'd bring up is some people don't understand why we do bear hunting. And so I'm gonna start with Spencer here. But why do you bear hunt?
I bear hunt because when it's April and May, quite often, like, our fishing season doesn't open here until May 15th. So quite often in the spring, there's not a heck of a lot else to do. I mean, I love getting outdoors. I love seeing animals, and it's good management too. If you're gonna hunt all the deer and the moose and the elk, the predators have got to be kept in check as well.
Yep.
I know there's cougar hunting. I believe it's fairly limited tag numbers around here, mostly with outfitters guided.
Lots
Dog
of
hunts,
hunting.
dog hunts, pretty much exclusively dog hunts here. And there's wolf trappers, so somebody's got to keep the bears in check. And spring's a good time to do it because there's the cows or the cow moose are going to be calving this time of year. The does are fawning.
Number on the calves. Bears are extremely good at following a moose that's about to give birth and just basically scooping up whatever she puts out. And it's extremely hard on the moose population. And if everyone wants to come out in the fall and they want to do some moose calling, they want to see some moose, they want to shoot a moose, and enjoy moose for 1-2 years to come, they have to control the bear population because you can't have big moose if you don't have little moose.
So Ryan, what about you? Why do you bear hunt?
For the most part, as an avid hunter, I love the sport. I love all aspects of the sport, and you can't solely enjoy hunting, in my mind, if you don't enjoy hunting every creature that there is. You got to hunt, your small game, your big game, your predators, your herbivores, your omnivores. If you're able to get a good balance when you're hunting, then you're able to understand the whole ecosystem of the area. So if I'm out here just shooting white-tailed does, I don't understand what it takes to repopulate, to conserve really the renewable resource that we're given. And in order to do that, you need to understand how to hunt everything.
Yeah, I think that's a fair answer. For me, it's you gotta be able to, like Spencer said, you gotta manage all the animals, and we've seen it time and time again in the springtime here. We're looking for bears, and you'll find cow moose that are running with their calves because they're afraid for their calves' lives and maybe even sometimes their own. And in this area too, because we're doing all this spot and stock hunting, we can't bait because there's grizzly bears, and grizzly bears are protected in Alberta. But you got to be able to manage the black bears. And we've seen the cow moose come out. They're sweating. They're running around. We've even seen, and something else that a lot of people don't realize, is a black boar. He'll go and he'll find a sow that has cubs. He'll chase every single one of them up a tree. If he gets them up that tree, and then he'll sit at the base of that tree. And we've witnessed this and spotted. Ryan spotted one time we were driving around. And he's like, "There's a bear," and everyone's like, "What? Where?" It was way up in the top of a poplar tree, probably 40 feet off the ground. And the boar was sitting at the base of the tree, and he was going to wait there until those bears came down. And the mom would have had the fight of her life with that boar. And then as soon as the cubs come down, he'd kill the cubs so that the mom goes into heat, and he can breed her
all over again.
And he'll do it all spring long with every set of sow and cubs that he can find. And it's just important to do that. It's important to make sure that we're balancing the ecosystem. I know Spencer and I shot some nice bears last year, which we're going to talk about in a different podcast with a little bit better audio quality. But we took 2 big bears out of an area that we saw probably 6 or 7 on the same strip of road.
Yep. But we didn't see a single cub.
Didn't see a single cub.
No.
But the other part of that too is we took 2 very mature bears out of that area, and that gives all the younger bears a chance to grow up and have a more fighting chance at the food source there, and they're not going to be putting their lives in danger for a bear that you may not even see the next year because he may have been too old and just got grumpy, pushed him off, but he's not eating it anyways.
Yep.
So it's very important to get out there, manage it. You got to balance all your populations, or else you get an influx in certain critters, and so I think that's a big reason why I have to go out and do the bear hunting every year. Um, but it's important. You got to keep all the numbers in check.
One thing I'd like to touch on with the bear hunting and taking mature bears, this just sprung a few thoughts in my mind, but those mature animals, quite often, if they are near death, it's a lot nicer death for them to end up shot by a hunter, and it kind of brings meaning to their life. Like, I mean, there's the money that your tags will provide is going to help the sustainability of the hunting. It's going to go back into conservation of the animals, conservation of the land that they're living on, and advocacy groups are going to help preserve that. That it's not going to all be developed, or that you won't have over harvesting of forests, everything.
Yeah, I was watching The Choice the other day, and Ralph and Vicky made a good point about how if hunters are against each other, that's kind of our worst enemy, is ourselves. In order to preserve hunting and make sure that all of this lasts, and that our kids can do it and our kids' kids can do it, is that we all got to be on the same side and working together and try to enjoy it together. And I know sometimes it gets tough because you run into other guys in your areas and you don't want to be having the competition, but it's good. It's healthy competition. And yeah, so
Something I'd like to ask you, Tyler. How do you feel about the so-called quote-unquote endangerment of the grizzly bears?
endangerment on grizzly bears. I want to do a full-on podcast about this at some point in time and back it up with a whole whack of stats. But I know from our personal experience, we run into grizzly bears every year. There hasn't been a grizzly bear hunting season in Alberta since I think the 90s.
98.
98?
The year I was
when
born.
they closed it. I know a lot of people didn't expect it to close, but the animal rights activists pushed real hard and they got their way, which they tend to do because hunting is on the decline, like I've talked about before, and all the antis are on the rise. So it's getting more and more difficult. I think that with all the attacks with the grizzly bears that you're seeing, that you need to see something put into place. Like Alberta, we got goat tags for mountain goats. It's like a handful of tags. It's less than a percent chance to get drawn.
It's really, really low.
Why not do that for grizzly bears? Why not go into an area like that has a serious problem with grizzly bear encounters or attacks or whatever it is every year,
And pick one or two tags.
Yeah, let a couple guys go in there. They don't have to be in there at the same time. It can be half a dozen tags for the whole province. Let the guys go in there, try to take out a couple of mature boars, because it'd be the same rules as apply with black bears. No sows, or sows with cubs anyway. Yeah, you take out a little bit more of the mature bears. And another thing that I really want to talk about that Spencer was saying with these animals that are at maturity and they're on the verge of dying, perhaps. A lot of these times you'll go out, and we've seen it with deer, and I'm sure it happens with bears and every other animal. The very biggest and mature animals, when they're going into the rut cycle or the feeding frenzies, they fight for their life. And sometimes they exhaust themselves right to the point where they can't even recover from that, and they just end up dying from all of that competition.
Lots of times with a big mature bear, maybe he wears down his molars to the point where he can't actually chew or process food.
Yep.
And starvation is a lot worse of a death than, a quick 30 seconds from a bullet,
Yep. And I guess to finish off on the grizzly bear thing, I absolutely think that there should be some sort of a limited season, a draw season of some kind. Like, we run into grizzly bears in November while we're deer hunting. And I don't know about you guys watching or listening, but when you're out deer hunting, you're not always out there with your 300 Win Mag or your 7 Rem Mag. I mean,
when you run into a grizzly bear, that's
yeah.
it. And, because in November, at that point, that bear is at, it's a fight or flight every time he runs into a scenario. So it's a risk reward. Should I, what risk am I putting myself at in order to get the reward of more food, or pushing bear or predator out of his area.
Yep.
And in November, that's what I would classify as waking up on the wrong side of the bed for a
Oh,
grizzly
totally.
bear.
They should be ready to be hibernating. And grizzly bears don't truly hibernate, which that's something that we know. But you don't want to run into them with your 243
Or your 257
or
or
your
your
257.
6.5 Creedmoor that
Yeah.
everyone is so, you know,
Yeah, some of these more popular small long range calibers, it's not a good thing to have in a situation where you may have to protect yourself.
with a grizzly bear, you're looking more so for, a bigger bullet, heavier grainage, and a lot
Exactly.
of these smaller flat shooting guns, they don't carry the oomph or the impact necessary in order to either put a bear down or to at least kill him without wounding him.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that they'll just see these bears in passing and that they won't have an encounter with them. But when we saw some grizzly bears, I think we saw 3 different bears in 2 days when we were whitetail hunting in November a couple of years ago. And the local fish and wildlife officers were in the area because a grizzly bear went into a moose hunting camp
In
where they had killed a
November,
moose in November. And when the hunters got back to their camp, this bear had decided that their moose was his.
and he wouldn't let them back in.
Nope, and that's a terrible thing to have to come across. Like, and that's why you'd want to make sure you have something a little bit bigger in the caliber. But if you're managing the bears in this area or those areas, then you probably wouldn't have so high of a risk of running into a situation like that.
I can only imagine for those hunters too, if they had happened to be in camp when that bear came in, he might have seen them as a threat to his carcass, and that could have been the end of them.
And I would say that 90% of the grizzly bear attacks are somebody accidentally stumbling upon a grizzly bear kill, not realizing what they're on, and the bear is very close by and very protective.
And unfortunately, a lot of the times when it comes to grizzly bears, most people don't understand what they're coming into or about to encounter. And the bear, it's his instincts. You can't blame the bear for it. But as conservationists, we know as the populace that there's always going to be activists, people enjoying the outdoors. There's going to be hunters. There's going to be people hiking. There's going to be people fishing. Anybody who's in the outdoors gets put at risk with animals like this.
Yeah, and I talked about it in my conservation podcast. Like hiking and wildlife photography, all these outdoor activities that don't involve having a firearm with you or hunting, they're on a huge rise right now, while hunting is on the decline, right?
Yeah.
And so you're going to have people in a situation like this where we're not managing these herds. They're just getting bigger and bigger, and these bears are getting more and more used to people being around, and that's not a good thing.
You don't want a bear to be really comfortable with human beings being around, and that's a lot of the times what happens on a lot of oil field sites up here is these bears get really acclimatized. People are giving it, they're throwing scraps out the windows because oh look, it's a cuddly teddy, it's a teddy bear.
Yeah, they're saying, hey, there's that truck, it comes by a couple times a day, we're not really afraid of it anymore.
Yeah, and there was a young woman that was working in a lease site up on one of the plants that I've worked at, and she come out of a wash cart, a bathroom, and there is a bear waiting for her as she got out, and she was mauled to death. And unfortunately, that's what happens when you don't keep bears in check. You get them too comfortable. At that point, now the risk is very minimal to get food, as the reward is very high, and that puts us at risk.
But then the other thing too is that bear that attacked her probably had to be put down.
I agree.
And
unfortunately, if they would have controlled the population properly, they would have never run into the issue of having to put that bear down the way that they did.
Yeah, so say you have a handful of attacks that result in a bear being shot every year, why not just have that handful of bears that are being killed put into the draw system so that hunters can go out and do it?
I agree. And because, even on, a restricted site like that, we recently did a hunt in an army base.
Yeah, we
very well done, very well managed. Everybody's kept in check. You have to wear your blaze orange. It's, short distance weapons we were using, primitive weapons.
Reports if you're going to be late.
Exactly. You had to check in all the time. And that's okay. If someone truly wants to hunt and manage and enjoy the outdoors, they have no issue with doing those kind of, meeting that criteria. And so if we could do stuff like that, I feel like a lot more conservation would benefit from it.
Yep. And I'm actually surprised we haven't seen a grizzly bear yet on this trip. But I'm sure that we're due. We're going to see one before spring's over for sure. Probably a couple of them.
I know last year when me and Spencer and we brought my younger cousin Isaac out, we kind of went into the back country that Tyler was talking about, where we would go, later May. And in that area, we had hit. It was a similar circuit of roads, maybe a 10-kilometer, square. And on that set of roads, we had ran into a grizzly bear 4 different times. Could it have
Yeah.
been the same bear a couple times? Possibly. But the likelihood of it not being is very high. 4 different encounters. And at one point, I had rolled the window down at this bear and he huffed at us. And generally, that's an extremely aggressive sign. This bear huffed at a Hemi. This is a half-ton pickup truck. It's not necessarily what you would classify as a threat to or a grizzly bear. And this grizzly bear decided he was going to get aggressive towards a pickup truck.
So how about you just kind of touch on, we're in a situation where we're doing a spot and stalk. We're trying to close range. We got a good wind direction, or maybe even a marginal wind direction, and you're trying to gauge this bear's body language while we're getting in to try and get a shot off.
To me, one of the biggest giveaways of aggression for a bear is the fake feed. And that's where they get into a feeding cycle where they kind of look like they're eating grass. They might even try to open their mouth and look like they're eating, but you can, if you're close enough to this bear, you can see it's not actually eating. It's just trying to fake you out, and it's always watching. And it'll just give you a little head looks. And at that point, you know that bear knows you're there, and then it starts to do stuff like, the yawn, where it likes to open its mouth all the way up, show you its pearly whites. Like, hey, look at what I got. What do you have on me? And so at that point, this bear is getting aggressive. You'll start to watch its body language, whether, if a bear is feeding and it doesn't know you're there, it'll be turning its back to you. It'll be sitting on its bum. It'll be laying down. It'll be doing all kinds of different things that it wouldn't really do if it knew there was a danger or a threat close by. And so it's extremely important to watch that bear's body language, how it's looking at you, whether its ears or back. Just kind of watch. If you feel like, you're getting into a fight with a human being, you kind of read that other guy's body posture. Okay, he's trying to puff his chest up. If they're doing something like that, then you kind of would liken it unto a bear. And if he's, getting all on edge and puffing his chest up, making him look bigger, yawning, showing you his teeth, be no different than a guy flexing his muscles on you. So
yeah, and the other thing too is if you're in on a stalk and your bear goes from acting like it's big and tough or the way that it should be presenting itself to very small and cautious, you're probably losing your opportunity for a shot. And it would be a good idea to, if you're in position, to make one count. Because I know we've seen that before in the fake feed. And even Zach's bear that he shot the other night there, he was doing a fake feed.
He tried to pull a fake feed, and lots of times the fake feed isn't necessarily a sign of aggression as it is timidness. Yeah. Lots of times when you get a bear and he might be quartering away from you and he gives you that big eared look where he kind of looks back and all stunned like what's going on. At that point, that's a very timid, he's scared. He's getting ready to bolt.
He's aware that you're there. He's just keeping an eye on you. If you get within his close range, 9 times out of 10, they're going to bolt.
But if you get lucky and you're in a spot or a position where you got good back cover, you're wearing decent camouflage. I'm not going to say any camouflage is better than another at this point. But if you get into a spot where you're blending in and you're able to kind of get your silhouette down, or you're blending into the bush or the grass that you're maybe coming up over a hill and you can get down behind it, if you can wait that bear out, if you got to stand there and lock up in an awkward position, it can burn your muscles as much as you want. But if you're determined and you stay in that spot for, it could be 30 seconds, it could be 2 minutes, it could be up to 5 minutes, usually not more than 5 minutes with a bear. But if you can get that bear to relax to the point, not as soon as it lowers its head down, and starts to feed again, you don't just, start moving again just as soon as it lets its guard down, but let it kind of relax and get back into
get
that.
more comfortable.
Get back into what it was doing, in its natural state. Then you're able to kind of get that next move on. And we had that, with a bear that Zach got there the other night. And it was just one of those things on these hotlines. They produce heat and nutrients for this grass to grow, and it grows an unbelievable amount. It grows 6 feet tall, and when it dies over the winter and gets matted, it's like this big, it's like a hardwood floor of dead grass. And so as you step on this grass, it's like stepping on a new box of cornflakes every time you move. And once you get into a situation like that, it's every step counts. You only get so much forgiveness when you're getting up on a bear. As they start to show you their body language, they start to realize that you're there. Of course, always trying to keep a low profile. A big profile is always a very intimidating thing to any animal. And as you get closer to that bear, you really want to make sure every step counts and just really ease into the stalk. Sometimes it's not about having a speed stalk. It's more so just about getting the job done just slowly and easily.
So Spencer, because you're a little bit newer into the bear hunting than we are, what's something that with bears either surprise you that you could get away with, or something that you can't get away with at all when you're on a stalk?
One thing that really surprised me is how sensitive they are to wind direction.
Yeah.
If you have any kind of a scent, like even I remember in a few hunts I was trying to spot and stalk with a bow, and I'd have all kinds of scent spray on and cover scent products, and as soon as you'd feel that wind at the back of your neck,
It was over.
that bear's gone. It's either turning aggressively, sizing you up, or it's gone.
Just a half a lick of wind going the wrong way, and
Yeah.
they're not even coming back out.
Whereas one thing I'd noticed with that is a lot of times the white-tailed deer we're hunting, whether they be out here in the bush or in the farmland, they aren't particularly heavily hunted.
Yeah.
So they may be a little bit more tolerant to that,
Mm-hmm.
especially does.
Or
Always know
maybe
with the
they're
white-tailed does, they may stand there for 5 or
yeah.
10 minutes after and really they want a sound or they want a sight before they're gone.
It might also go to show that a bear's nose is more attuned to smelling things than a deer's. But which is weird because a bear is the king of the forest here. There's not much that's going to take down a bear other than another bear. So for them to be so sensitive to foreign smells, it's pretty incredible to see that an animal that's so big and mighty is at the same time so timid and shy.
Another thing I'd like to touch on that surprised me with bears is how, from area to area, their temperaments can completely differ.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
we've had some areas around here where if they smell you, they're gone, and there could be other times that a bear will smell you and it'll want to come closer and check you out, be aggressive, and it'll. We've had them where you're worried for your life at times.
Well, we've noticed even with baiting, we had some baiting setups that I believe our dad had done them for over 10 years, probably a lot longer than that. He'll know. And we'd set up a bear bait. Man, it would be sitting there for 3 weeks. We'd be lucky if we got one bear on camera. Having it even touch the bait was another story. And then we started baiting in a different area a couple years ago, and half an hour we had bears. By the end of the weekend, we had 12 different bears on camera.
You couldn't even get off the quad.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you just knew there was a bear either close by or it was there. And actually, on that specific bait site, me and Spencer had a cub try to climb our tree while we were in the tree. First time I had ever experienced it. You always see the video of some guy, he's got his little handy cam out and he's trying to stomp this bear's nose because it's coming up the tree. And you never really think that would happen to you. But it's intimidating. It could be a 50-pound bear, it could be a 150-pound bear, but you know that thing has enough strength to rip a human being out of a tree.
So, man, my odds are on a 50-pound bear over a 300-pound human.
100%. And at that point, you don't really want to take any chances. But in that specific area where that bear had climbed our tree, those bears don't really fear humans in that area, and they really fear trucks, quads, ATVs, anything of that sort. But on foot, I've never seen an area quite like that where a bear gets so aggressive, and
they're just so comfortable with you being in their personal space. It's eerie.
Yeah, it's not a good thing when a bear is comfortable. I mean, I've had a bear stand up 3 yards away on its hind legs from me, and I was with my dad at the time, and I was personally, if I had a gun in my hand, I would have been out of lead pretty quick. But my dad had the composure to we kind of stood the bear off, and the bear would get down on its four legs and try to take a step closer, and we're only 3. I mean, I had a camera tripod that was probably 3-4 feet long, and I'm pretty sure I could have smacked him on the nose if I would have extended it and whipped it at him. And it was just the way it was. He'd get down, we'd take a step back, he'd take a step forward, and we were just playing this game of chess, trying to get our way out of that field. And that was
where was I going with that? On that or in that area there, actually. So one time I went in to do a little bit of rebaiting, and I had the quad running. I had some meat scraps in a bag from some of the grain that we had.
Yeah.
And I was standing on the back rack of this quad, reaching as high as I could to try and get this rope around a branch or whatever. The whole time I'm doing it, there's this black bear sitting right next to the bait barrels on his bum, watching me standing on top of the quad, talking out loud with the quad running. And I'm like, well, I know I can spend all this time putting this up here, but he's just going to come and rip it down. So finished doing what I was doing, came back the next day, and he just tore the bottom of the bag open, took everything out of it, it's gone. Yeah. Just a giant waste of time. Yeah.
One other thing I think we should add about that area that we were baiting is that it was only about 1 or 2 miles from an area where cows were calving. and I'm not sure how many of the local farmers had reported that were bear killed, but there was a great number. I'm sure it was more than 10 calves that had their faces ripped off by a bear.
Yeah, and if it doesn't kill them right away, it'll either come back in the next day, or the calf has such bad injuries that it just succumbs to the injuries.
Yeah.
And so I guess we can get onto that topic too with baiting, because a lot of people have issues with baiting bears and baiting animals in general. In Alberta, all we're allowed to bait is bears, and it's very restricted. Like we were saying, we can't do it here because of the grizzly bear population. But in a few different areas that we've tried it, it's actually amazing how few bears or how many bears you'll get to come into a bait site.
It can be either an extremely effective tactic or an extremely
Giant waste of time.
Yeah, it could be just a complete, nobody would expect. And the hard part about bear baiting that most people don't understand is the input of time and money that is required to operate a bear bait, and in specific, multiple bear baits. At that time, we were running 3 different bear baits, and there was 2 of us, and we were always hunting together as a pair. It's extremely hard to hunt 3 baits at one time.
Yep.
And so, maybe you get a bear on camera at noon. You quickly rep over to bait number 3, and you try and sit for that bear at noon. And let's try and go over here for an evening hunt. You sit on bait number 1, and it could be miles apart. It could be kilometers. It could be 100 yards, depending on who's putting a bear bait out. And in that specific area, we had a lot of success with one bait, and we kind of rode the coattails on it. But that didn't mean that we weren't putting hundreds of dollars of bear bait out on every single bait, setting up tree stands. We had to go up months beforehand. At that point, then you're dealing with deep snow, difficult conditions.
Making sure all your shooting lanes are clear.
It can be a very difficult thing to make a successful bear bait happen.
It's so difficult to maintain and upkeep when you're driving hours and hours to make sure that you can do this. And sometimes we drive a lot of hours just to get to a hunting spot. But that's why with spot and stock, it's nice because we can just drop everything on a whim. Come out here where we don't have to worry about no baiting. We don't have to worry about none of that. You just grab your gun, you go, and you hope to catch the bears feeding on the green grass. But with the baits, it's a lot of effort, a lot of input, and a lot of the times, your biggest bears, you don't even get a shot at them.
Lots of times they become nocturnal, just like in most areas, like a Saskatchewan, where you can bait for whitetail bucks. The big whitetail buck doesn't always come out in the daylight. They're very nocturnal. Big bears are very much similar. No animal gets big without being smart. And yeah, no, you make a great point with that, Tyler. It just is very much the truth.
Well, because we had one bear on the bait that you shot, your biggest bear,
yep.
And you can sit there any night you want. You're probably not going to see him, but you'd have to sit there every single day from sun up till sundown until you catch a glimpse of this bear. Because once he comes into that bait, he doesn't come back in the daylight at all. He just comes in the dark.
It's one shot right at the start of season, and that's just the way that bear is. Lots of times, every bear has a character to it. Maybe they're a little more timid or more aggressive style bear. Their habitual patterns. And with that bear, that's exactly what he did. He would always come in once at the start of season, and then he was done.
Yeah. It's very similar to hunting a giant whitetail. Yeah. You got to sit there, and if he makes that one day that he makes a slip up or a mistake, you got to be there for it, or else you're not going to get it.
On a bit of a different subject, I'd like to ask Spencer about this because I recall a good memory about it. Have you ever had a mishap when you were bow hunting a bear, Spencer?
Oh, this is a beauty.
Yeah, one time in that lease I was talking about where I got my first bear, I was spot and stalking a bear with my bow, and at the time I had planned, okay, if there's a smaller bear out there, I'm going to shoot with my bow. If it's a larger bear, I'm going to try with the rifle, because it's a lot harder to get in on the bear, and it's cool just to have that experience of spot and stalking. So I get all stalked up to the bear, have Ryan holding the gun, and ready to make the shot. Go to clip my release on my bowstring. My release was in the truck.
It's funny because in that scenario, you'd think that that's an essential tool. That's like forgetting the trigger on your gun.
Yeah.
But it's so easy when you get that adrenaline rushing, because in that area, we knew there was bears in that lease every time we went into it. And it's so easy to get that adrenaline going, and it just slips.
You just forget that one thing. At that time, I just thought, well, I know it's going to be really hard to stalk up on a bear with my bow, but I'll plan for the gun. I'm bringing the bow just in case I have a good opportunity. And that bear was in the middle of the lease. so I could stalk up along the edge and have my 40 or 50-yard shot,
Yeah.
which at the time I believe would have been my ethical range. I'd question that in some scenarios for a range on a bear because you usually can stalk fairly close.
Yeah.
But in that particular scenario, I messed up.
Spencer,
man.
have you had? Because I know Ryan and I have had our fair share. But have you ever had a really scary or hairy situation with a bear?
Yeah, one time we actually had a few with Ryan. Last year when we
Yeah.
were out, we were hunting elk and mule deer, and we were dropping into a valley that's nearby to where we were hunting to start our morning hunt. How do we have? We had 3 or 4 bears waiting at the top there, cruising around, going in and out of the cow pasture and feeding on fields. And as soon as they notice something's there, they're starting to come closer and closer. And at that point, we don't have a gun. It's too dark to shoot our bows because it was still 20 or 30 minutes before legal light. That one could have got really hairy.
You know, that bear had, because we had spotted one bear about 60 yards over this one side of the fence, you know, all this area we had permission on. And we were only maybe 150 yards from the edge of this river valley. And we had to get into that river valley and get down a considerable ways. We wanted to get down 200 or 300 yards past that edge. So it was going to take us that 20 minutes before legal light to get there. And all of a sudden we had heard a branch break. And what was it, 15, 20 yards?
Yeah, we had ranged it. I believe it was right around 20 yards.
And there was a bear coming through the fence right behind us. He was dead downwind. And that bear 100% knew that we were there. And that's the scariest part. When a bear knows you're there with a sensitive nose, you know that it could get into a more aggressive or difficult situation, even more so when it's at dark.
So would you say that's like one of your more scary encounters, or is there one that tops your list?
Like I was saying, the one that would top my list of all is when I was with my dad last year. I've never thought I'd see the day. It was only about a 5'10" bear, stood about as tall as I did. But when a bear is willing, at that point, that we had seen that bear come out in that field a couple times with 40 yards, he winded us, went back in the bush, and he come out at 20. And at that point, you're like, oh, okay, you're a little bit close. So we kind of got up, we bluffed him, we spooked him, and all of a sudden, we were hunting elk. Maybe 5 minutes after we spooked him at 20 yards, he come charging through the bush, not running, but kind of at a trot, an aggressive speed. And all of a sudden, he was on top of us at about 5 yards, and he was on his hind legs. And we're both standing there. We're a couple of pretty good-sized guys, 6-foot guys. And this bear was on its hind legs at spitting distance. And there's nothing more terrifying than knowing that that bear is maybe 2 Mississippis away from ripping you apart, and you don't even have a gun in your hand. That's about the most intimidating feeling I've ever felt.
See, luckily enough, in that scenario, that would have been a healthy bear. Had that bear been desperate in a survival situation where it's a leaner bear or one of these mature bears that has lost its teeth, that bear might be more prone to view a human as food or to have to defend its territory.
And what's interesting about that, and I'm going to get back to scary encounters here in a second, but my dad took his brother out hunting for bears for the first time, and that was quite a few years ago now. And around that time frame, somebody that had been camping out in the woods had been dragged in their tent by a bear, then ripped out of their tent and killed by this bear. And it was a black bear.
I believe that bear dragged that tent over 200 yards.
Yeah, it was a long ways. Can you imagine? That would be so terrifying. And so my dad took his brother out hunting, and they came across this bear that did not care about them, did not care about the truck. You could have gotten out and patted this bear on the bum. It probably would have bit your arm off, but it was going to let you get into that range. And it wasn't a huge bear, and it doesn't take a big bear to be an aggressive bear. It can be a small one. We figured that one was a sow, or it was a sow.
Close to that 200-pound range.
She didn't have cubs. We thought maybe she struggled through the winter and ate her cubs when she woke up, because they'll do that.
Yep.
And so my uncle decided, you know what, might not be the biggest of first bears that we're looking for, but we're going to take this one out just because we don't want to see this happen to somebody else. So it's another big nod to conservation, and you got to make sure that if you're taking these weak or dangerous animals out of the herd, that you take that chance and that opportunity to do it.
I remember the story how my dad had said it. That bear actually, while my dad's brother was in the truck, followed my dad around the truck.
Yeah, insane.
And at that point, that bear's not looking to play Ring Around the Rosie. That bear's looking to get a quick meal, and you
Wants
don't
to
want
give you a hug.
Yeah, you don't want to be that quick meal.
No. And so back to the scary stories. It's funny that you brought up that you're elk hunting with that story, because it seems every very scary story we have, it involves elk hunting.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I would rather be that guy that has a close encounter with a bear where the bear is huffing and puffing at me, because I know that that bear is telling me, hey, I'm giving you a warning, stay your distance, or I'm going to come closer and you're not going to like what happens.
Yeah.
Because we've had it before where we're stalking elk, we're on a cut line, and remember that one time you turned around and the bear was walking right towards us?
Couldn't believe it. It was a sow, and it was a sow with a cub, which at the time I was fairly young. I was probably 14 years old, and that's terrifying. You're a 14-year-old kid. I'm bringing up the back of the bus, and there's 4 of us in line, and no one wants to be the caboose in the first place.
And I don't think that bear knew we were there.
That bear had no idea that we were there at any point, and it actually walked off the cut line on its own accord without ever knowing we were there.
Probably within 10 feet of us.
About 10 feet.
Yeah. And I remember another time I was hunting down this fence line and sitting there, and the wind was terrible, blowing straight to the way that I had come in, and waiting for elk. Saw this cow elk poke her head over the fence, look around. She wasn't very happy about the wind, so she went back into the bush. And then next thing I knew, I'm sitting in the tall grass with my bow. There's this bear coming at us. And it's just, at that time of year, the black bears are getting grumpy. Grizzly bears, because they're up so much longer, they kind of have a little more tolerance at that time of the year.
Yeah.
But with the black bears, oh man, you don't want to be on their bad side. And so that's a couple situations where elk hunting we've run into bears. And I think the worst one for me was that one time we decided we were going to get into this new spot. There's elk in the back of this field. We knew that we could cut across in the back through the bush. There was a tiny little cut line. It was probably no wider than 2 men.
Big enough to fit 1 quad down.
Yeah, exactly. And we got back there. There was, I think, 2 or 3 main trails that these elk were going to come across if they did. And Ryan and my dad decided they were going to go off to this next one. I'm standing next to a spruce tree like this, like in the boughs with my bow. And I hear branches breaking, and I'm like, oh man, the elk are coming. And I turn to my right to look, and a bear comes out, jumps over this log. And it wasn't a big bear, but like I said, I'd give air to the 50-pound bear over the 300-pound man. And this bear comes running right by me so close that it almost stepped on my feet, and I could have kicked it. I had no idea I was there. I don't remember what camouflage we were wearing, but tip of the hat to them.
It was working.
And the bear just walked right by me. I'm standing there with my bow, just like, don't move, don't breathe, don't want this thing to know that I'm there. And yeah, and the other part of it too is a person's got to be able to stay calm in a situation like that. There's a lot of people that have that bear come out and they just start panicking.
And I will speak from experience. I get I'm not afraid to say it, scared when a very sizable bear, when a bear gets past, I say about the 350-pound range, once a bear crests that, it gets a mean look to it. Mm-hmm. It just gets it becomes a whole nother animal. It gets thicker. It's the face looks, it could be scarred. It could be just the snout is a little bit wrinkled, like he's growling, or he's frowning all the time. And when I get a bear like that within 30, 40 yards, or even closer than that, that's about where I start to shake. And I'd be the first one to say, I've had a bear come really close to me, and I've made I've taken a shot in self-defense, and I've missed it. Straight up, clean missed it at 20 yards. You think you couldn't do that on a 400-pound bear, but I have done it, and that's solely because the adrenaline's rushing you, and you just screw up. But, thankfully in that scenario, that bear just turned and went the other way.
You think about the nerves associated with getting set up and lined up on a trophy animal. Imagine having an animal you don't want anything to do with coming at you, and you got to think real quick and make a good decision.
Yeah, and if it's a life or death situation, I know personally, I've had Spencer at my side in a life or death situation with bears charging us, and I'd be the first to testify if I ever had someone I could choose, it would be Spencer, because I've seen him.
Yeah, in that scenario, we were tracking a bear at the time. It was close to dark, and we had shot on a bait. This was a different bear, and we were a fair ways from the bait. I think we were 200 or 300 yards away, so you're not in the general vicinity at all. And I had spotted the bear, yelled at it a couple times, and that thing, it went from going on a 45 towards us, and it was turned to come straight towards us, and it found the thickest brush it could so that we couldn't see it until it was right on top.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not good to have that kind of situation.
And you know, at that point, you want to have a good backup gun, which is another subject I'm sure we could get onto. You know, that was a 30-30 bolt action. They're not pretty cool little gun.
Yeah.
And Spencer made good shots. Both shots were, you know, straight kind of in the neck, front, chest area, and it put the bear down. But in a scenario like that, if you're able to hold your cool, that's pretty respectable.
It's not an ideal way to fill your tag, but if you have to, I guess that's the way that it goes sometimes. But like you're saying, man, having a good backup, even if when we're out doing spot and stock with the bows, if you got a second guy with you, make sure that guy's got a gun. In Canada, we're not allowed to carry a sidearm, unfortunately. It would be a huge advantage to a lot of hunters from the safety point of view.
Yep.
But having a good gun right next to you, whether it's a shotgun or a 30-30 lever action, something quick, something that you're comfortable with, that you don't have to take all the time to bolt it, and then
you know, open sights is a big
exactly
aspect
open
to
sights
it.
is
Yeah, huge thing. Quick target acquisition is a key. That's a must-have in a life or death situation, because you can't turn your scope power down, or even if you do have it at 3 power, that's still
The rarity of being able to find a bear at 20
Yeah.
yards charging you, and not just finding the bear, but finding your kill zone. And you know, that's where you get that open sights, you get that full view of what's going on around you. You know, you can even watch around you at that point. You know your whole surroundings. And you know, personally, my favorite backup gun is a 30-30 lever action. You know, you can fit a good few rounds in it.
it's a good bush gun.
Yeah, it pounds through brush pretty easily. It's got pretty good grainage.
it's one of the lightest guns you can buy too.
Yep.
At least for us here, I would say it is the lightest gun that you can have carrying on your side as a backup gun. It's what do they weigh, about 5.5 pounds?
Yep, and I mean at that point they're a pretty short gun. They're easy to maneuver. You can throw them over your shoulder, however you want to do it. Throw them in your backpack, and they're, as far as I would say, probably, in my opinion, the best in Alberta, the best backup gun you can have for anything going up to black bears, up to even what I would classify as smaller grizzlies. Maybe not.
At that point, you might want a 45-70.
Yep.
That would be maybe a more ideal gun, but not everyone's going to want to shoot a 45-70.
No, and it's I would say no matter the caliber, but like you guys are saying, it's important to make sure you know what stopping power you're holding on to. But it's good to make sure that you do have that in a situation, just in case you need it.
I agree. And also to be practiced.
Yep.
You want to make sure you practice. You know, you don't even necessarily have to hit your target all the time if you're freehanding, because in a situation, I know some guys that are better at shooting targets than they're at shooting animals, and vice versa. But you just want to make sure you're comfortable with the gun. You know where the safety's at. You know what you got to do for the lever action or the bolt action or the pump, or however you're operating that weapon. You just want to make sure you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, and you've shot your 30-30, you're comfortable with it, but because we're out here, we're doing some bow hunting, we did some target practice with the guns today just to make sure that even if the gun is on, you want to make sure that mentally and just the reps that you go through in shooting, that you're still on.
100%. Because lots of times you get into a fresh season, like we said, this is our first trip out, and you may not have that muscle memory or that continual practice that you carried over from last year.
Yeah, the excitement might take over, and then you forget a step, and the next thing you know, something doesn't go the way you planned it.
Very much so.
But I know we've talked for quite a while. I think I'm going to try and do some finishing remarks here. I'll start with Spencer. What would you say, because there's a lot of people that try bear hunting that don't care to do it ever again, and you're avid, you want to do it all the time, every year we're out here doing this, but what would you say was the one moment in bear hunting that made you go, yeah, you know what, this is a blast, I got to do this again?
I'd say it would be your bachelor trip. I believe that was 4 years ago. The thing that I loved with it is that we're out here in April, and we're bush camping. Like, just the experience being around you guys and anybody who's in bear camp with us, it's an amazing experience being out in the spring, seeing all these beautiful places, and the fact that you are helping with conservation is huge.
Yeah, and the camaraderie of having everybody with you, because it's so easy to get on such a low if you're by yourself and things aren't going as planned. On that trip there, we had some really good moments and some really poor moments, but we all had such a blast. We were in there together, and we just kept pushing each other to enjoy it.
Likewise with this trip, we've only actually seen one bear so far,
Yeah.
and we're not sure what the reasoning is. I mean, I think we're early. Maybe there was a lot of winter-killed deer over this winter, but the thing of it is, we're having a great time out here.
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more bear sign every day. We're finding scat on lines that we've walked since we've gotten here that wasn't there when we first walked it. We know they're there, and like any other animal, you just got to be there at the right time. Just got to cross paths with them just that one time to see whether or not it's a shooter and B if you can shoot it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, we're gonna have a good time with it. Even if we don't on this trip, we're gonna on the next one.
It's even a great time not seeing bears, just being out here in the bush. Like we're
Getting away from everything, getting
Yep.
away from the coronavirus
Yeah.
nonsense.
Yeah, all that.
no, this is awesome camping out here.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Ryan, what about you? What was your one moment that just you're hooked?
You know, it's kind of hard to say. You know, with bear hunting, I've had so many good memories and encounters. I think really over the years, what got me hooked, not just on bear hunting, but hunting in general, was moments like watching my brother get his first bear, seeing the adrenaline and, you know, the stalk and just being on hunts like that. That's really what got me into bear hunting and to be such an avid hunter throughout the years. But if it was a personal experience as to which bear I shot, I'm probably gonna say that it would be. Whew, that's a tough one. I'm gonna say it's probably my first bear.
Yeah.
I'd say it's my first bear. Just having the experience of such an amazing creation come at you. You know, just it wasn't aggressive or anything, but just coming up the road and getting so close and just dropping it in its tracks. Just that kind of an experience, and having my grandpa there. You know, now that he's passed, just having those memories to hold on to. I find that those are.
Well, that whole
Probably.
trip in general was a blast. With your bear that you shot was the second of three we got that day.
Yeah, and
was,
when you can go out and you can harvest so many nice animals like that, you know, and see so many, the hunting maybe not so good anymore in that area as it is now due to, you know, winter kills and logging and all that. But, you know, just to be able to have those experiences, it's pretty hard to shy away from the spring when you know that there's the potential of memories like that are coming back.
Yeah, and I always tell people, like, you can go through all my antlers or my photo album, and I can tell you to the detail a story about every single animal that I've shot. I can tell you a lot about ones that I've missed or just had an encounter where it didn't work. And that's the biggest part is making those memories. They last you forever. People are like, well, I just see a set of antlers, and I'm like, you know what, man? You have no idea. Sit down. We're going to be here a while about that one pair of antlers. But yeah, and I think for myself, what hooked me on bear hunting, that's a hard one. I've said it before that shooting my first bear was really what did it. And I think in a broader picture, every stalk we go, that ability to not trick a bear, but put yourself into a position where you're in the power to close the distance and take advantage of their body language and that situation. There's just something about it that can't be mirrored or mimicked. It's such a high knowing that you can get within that close range of the animal. And there's a lot of times we've done it just for the sake of trying it, and we didn't have intentions of shooting the animal. But it's so cool to be able to do something like that, and it's
with bears. I find the stalking is second to none because with a deer or a moose or an elk, if you ever try to stalk one of those animals, you need a crop. You need them to be in the bush laying down. You need a situation that's so optimal that it just doesn't. It's rarely ever existent. And with bears, you can turn just about any situation as long as your wind is good, and you're able to read the bear's body language, and you have the right terrain to do it. You can almost close the distance anytime on a bear.
And sometimes the best way to do it is in a black hoodie and blue jeans.
It depends on the bear and its body language. But yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys watching, taking the time to listen. If you liked what you saw, let us know. You can find On the Blood Trail. It's on Instagram, it's on Twitter, it's on Facebook. We got it streaming on, I think, 10 different podcast services. This is going to be on YouTube as well as on the different streaming services. So if it seems like we're trying to show body language or something and you can't understand what we're doing, it's because this is being videoed. But I'd like to take the time to thank Spencer, thank Ryan. I always appreciate you guys taking the time to sit down and discuss some hunting topics with me and for the viewers, listeners. And I'm sure we've got lots more that we could talk about, and I look forward to doing a couple more, hopefully sometime soon here.
Well, thanks for having us, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right.